Hey everybody, welcome to the Tux Care stream. I am your host, Chris Demars, Senior Developer Advocate at Tux Care. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're at. I got some water here. Hopefully you are hydrated, staying hydrated. Hopefully you're having a great day. We have a great, very, very special guest today, and I am going to bring up to the stage my friend and I don't even know why I said former, fellow Michigander, Kim Maida. Hey, what's going on, Kim?
Hey, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I am good. What day is it? It's Wednesday. It's an okay day.
It's been a long week. It's been a long week. Oh, I don't even know why I said former. I'm like, Kim's not a former Michigan.
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
That's right.
Still in Michigan.
That's right.
Always.
So how are things?
Things are going. I'm mildly concerned because conference season is starting and COVID seems to be sort of a resurging right now.
Mm-hmm.
So basically just doing everything I can to not get sick.
Yeah, for sure. Take your vitamins.
Yeah. Wear a bubble. Don't go outside.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you want, I would love for you to give an introduction to all the viewers, listeners, anybody watching out there. Let them know who Kim is, what Kim is all about.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Kim Maida. I'm currently the Senior Director of Developer Relations at Fusion Auth. I have sort of started my career in science, biology, and made the switch to development when I realized that, in fact, you can have a career doing your favorite hobby, which was fun. So I was a developer for a while, and then kind of incidentally, serendipitously, was given the opportunity to speak at a conference. I thought that sounds absolutely terrifying. I should definitely do it. And I did it, and I really enjoyed it. And I kind of haven't really looked back since then. As far as DevRel is concerned, I've been in DevRel since, and I hope to remain in DevRel for pretty much the foreseeable future.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I just being a DevRel practitioner as well and a developer advocate in the space for years. I've seen the work that you've done and the amazing work that you've done, and it's you're very high up in the world of DevRel people to me. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for the work that you've done and the guides and the tutorials you've created around DevRel and measuring and KPIs and metrics. It's all amazing work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've realized that the last time I wrote something around metrics, I think was like 2 or 3 years ago. And I had come to the realization recently when people mention it to me that my thinking has continued to evolve and I should probably write something new.
Yeah. Well, let me know when you do, because
I will. Time, it's always a time thing, right? I'm trying to find time.
Yeah. Is there any social platforms that you want to plug so people can follow you?
You know, honestly, lately I've been mostly active on LinkedIn, and I don't know if that's just a sign of the times, or if it's me getting older. But I've really sort of ended up gravitating away from some of the other like more async short form platforms. So, and I think other people have as well. Like I've definitely seen a lot more of the people that I talk to often or, have in my close network are kind of more active on LinkedIn than other places these days.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting shift. It used to be.
That's for sure.
Twitter, all the things.
Yeah. Well, if you're new to the channel, if you're tuning in from LinkedIn or YouTube, Twitter, make sure you give us follows and sub us. And if you're tuned into Twitch, make sure that you give us a follow on Twitch. Would really appreciate it. We kicked off this Twitch stream I think about a month ago, and we're slowly but surely building it up. So we're going to have some amazing guests on, and we're just talking about all things web and software, open source, back-end, front-end, security, DevRel community, as well as Auth. And today, Kim and I are going to talk about Auth. Kim is going to school me on Auth, specifically architecture. That's a hard thing. Architecture-driven Auth for app developers. So let's break that down. What does that mean, Kim?
So architecture-driven auth was kind of a term that I I sort of coined myself, but essentially, generally, app architecture over time has just become way more complex and way more dynamic than it ever was when we first wrote the auth standards. So, like OAuth 2, OAuth 2 is about 13 years old now, which is crazy if you think about that in like internet technology time. It's like eons ago, but we still use it like all the time. We use it. It's still the standard. So a lot of things have been kind of added as internet drafts and additional RFCs to continue to make OAuth 2 safer and to kind of fill security gaps. And also, attackers have gotten more savvy to it. They've been able to exploit implementation weaknesses and things like that. And our days of just kind of having a back-end app or a front-end app are kind of gone. Like, architecture is very complex. You might have some super complex thing that has a combination of, like, maybe you have your own server, maybe you have your own database, maybe you are using like a platform as a service, maybe you have serverless cloud functions. There's all of these different ways to deploy apps and to build them. And OAuth was pretty, like, specifically only focused on pretty simple cases for architecture, and it's just something that has grown and evolved and will continue, like, is actively continuing to grow and evolve right now. So the role that architecture actually plays in Auth has become more of something that I think we kind of need to be at least aware of, especially because if you have something running on the back end, something running on the front end, the decision to just like drop your auth in the front end in front of the user is not actually as straightforward and simple as a decision as people might think. And I think we've kind of seen this happening over the last few years too, where a lot of, the security advice has been for years is don't put tokens in local storage, right? Like, it was use the implicit grant flow where you have everything coming in through the browser, but just don't store your tokens in local storage because they'll persist for too long and they're accessible. But given sort of architectural complexity, the best thing actually to do is to not expose any of that to the browser at all if you have a backend. And I think, the concept of backend for front end has been around for a little while, and mostly it has, sort of pertained to the idea of like people having multiple apps and then all of the apps are using the same backend. So, the idea is to create a backend for each front end that you have. But this can absolutely apply to Auth as well. And it's definitely like the most secure way to do it. But there are it sort of incrementally goes like, here's the most secure way, but it requires this specific type of architecture. Here's this kind of interim way. And then here's the way that a lot of people have been doing it, but it's actually the least secure. And I'm a full stack developer, but a lot of my focus is JavaScript. So, a lot of my experience in development has been in the front end in browser-based apps. So browser-based app security has always been kind of a matter of first concern for me, because the browser is an extremely insecure place, as it turns out.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any, I don't know, how can I put this? Are there tools to, or let's say specifically, let's flip to FusionAuth, because I've done some of the test examples and stuff like for Next.js that you guys offer, which I think you guys have amazing docs. I was able to get through all of that. Is that that example that you can do, that hands-on example, is that an example of architecture-driven auth for Next specifically? Or how would that work? Or is it something that you roll on your own, or is it part of a framework or a library that you're going to use?
That's a great question, because it has a lot to do with that. The providers, most of the auth providers have SDKs, right, for each different platform or each different language. And most people just download the SDK that the provider gives you and they plug it in and, they're off to the races. And historically, you haven't had to really kind of intrinsically understand exactly what's under the hood when you work with Auth SDKs. And that's still kind of true, but I do think that it benefits people to kind of know about the different architectures and their implications, because the providers actually use these different architectures in their SDKs. And there's limitations to it, right? Because a real backend for front end proxies APIs and that type of thing. It's like an API gateway. And obviously your auth provider can't just magically do that for you. You have to still do that. So you're making architectural decisions, but the thing that a lot of providers have done is they've made the decision to use what we call token mediating backend, essentially where you proxy your auth processes through a backend, and that can actually be provided by the auth provider. So you can kind of offload session management and token storage, or like persistent token storage and that type of thing, to the backend that's still in the care of the auth provider. And then, in the front end, you can use your access token, and that the token mediating backend architecture is pretty frequently used by auth providers. Because it gives a little bit more security, but it also still gives the user freedom to kind of use the access token in whatever way they need to. Fusion Auth is actually somewhat unique in this respect because we do kind of more of a backend for front end. So we actually don't expose tokens in the browser where they're accessible to JavaScript at all. That's the default behavior in the front end SDKs. You can implement any of the other architectures yourself using the TypeScript client library. So we will expose pretty much everything in the API, and then you can customize it to your specific architecture type. But the way that Fusion Auth protects the tokens from essentially being stolen in the browser is to put them in HTTP only cookies, which can only be created by a backend. So you can't do that from the front end in the first place. Like you need a server to generate a cookie that can't be read by JavaScript. And then you can move the cookies around. And, I think like the caveat that comes up is always that cookies are same domain. So if you're crossing domains, then you might need to be a little bit more deliberate in how you're architecting it, or you might just need to use like a custom domain. But this idea of kind of the front end SDKs being sort of secure by default is something that I really was almost kind of like surprised to see. Surprise is maybe not exactly the right word, but maybe impressed. I was happy to see this being done. And then kind of when I went, because I wanted to see what everybody is doing, right? Like I used to work at Auth0, I worked at Okta.
Right.
Like I like to see what people are doing in general in the provider space. And what I found is a lot of people are doing the handling of tokens and session management and everything for people, but they're still giving you the access token, in like clear text essentially. So you have the JSON web token, you can just grab it and you could technically decode it or do whatever you wanted with it, really. So that's something that is often outside of the provider's control, which is why you will often see the token mediating backend being the pattern that providers give you by default in the SDK. But you're still leaving, your access token open for protection that has to be handled by the app developer. So there's still, an amount of knowledge that you have to have about app security and about auth security in general in order to know what to do with that token once you have it. And
so in let's say we have a scenario where we have like a team and we're building something that needs auth. Is that, I'm going to guess no, but what are the various teams that would have to be involved in these decisions? I mean, it's kind of in the name, right? The architecture team. But is it a culmination of architecture, front end, back end, and security that are coming up with the design, or is it little pieces here and there, and then the front end team or the back end team just takes all of that information and then just starts to build that out and then passes it off to a security and architecture team to kind of foolproof it?
I think it would actually probably start in architecture, because
Okay.
in order to implement these different implementations of Auth, you need to have specific architectures, and many people already have their architecture, which is why I'm calling it architecture driven Auth. The
Hmm.
choice of which Auth approach you take can largely be determined by your architectural capabilities. Like if you have a front end app and it does not have a back end, it's completely isolated from any kind of server that you have control over, then you kind of can't build your own backend for front end because you don't have a backend to build it on, right? So
Hmm.
this is why a lot of the providers are kind of being that backend for the auth functionality,
Hmm.
because it allows you to have your front end even if you aren't controlling a backend, and to be able to still implement auth in a decently safe way. Uh, there's one way that you just shouldn't do it too, which is just completely doing OAuth in a public client,
Hmm.
which it's documented in the standards, but it's kind of interesting because the standards basically say don't use this.
Hmm.
So it's like, here it is, but don't do it.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Does the backend matter? The language or the framework that you're using? Because I know like some organizations that I've worked for, let's say like the front end app is built in Angular or Angular JS, and the back end was .NET C Sharp, or the front end was built in vanilla JavaScript. Well, I'm going to take it back a little bit in some jQuery, and the back end was all Java. Does it matter the connection between the front and the back end languages and frameworks? Does one make it easier or harder to use than the other, or is it kind of just seamless across the board when that light bulb goes off?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay,
As
cool.
long as, because how you're interacting between the different components is through APIs. So
Gotcha.
as long as you can expose API routes that a front end can call, and the front end can call the API routes and get stuff back, then that's really the only interaction that you need to have functional in order to make some of these things work.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I built a bunch of demos because I'm most familiar with JavaScript. I built the backends in Node, and I built the front ends in there's like a React one, and then there's also an Angular one. But they could be in completely different languages as long as they can communicate with each other.
Hmm. That's awesome. Well, someone told me that you might have a couple demos or a demo to show off, and I know I would love to see it. This is a great learning experience. I know our viewers would love to see it. So if you wanted to get that rocking and rolling, we can throw that up on the screen.
Yeah, me actually, I think I'm gonna open the second monitor here. Move this to this monitor, and then this one. Okay. So I have this repo on GitHub. It's just called Auth Architecture, but it has all of the different architectures built into the same repo. Essentially because I thought that having like 4 or 5 repos would get confusing and people would get lost. But I have it pulled up here also. So I guess the first thing that maybe is useful to see is I'll just go to the browser, and what is this doing in the browser? And technically, basically, these architectures should look more or less the same in the browser. We have, the overview of what I'm showing right now is the backend for front end. It has a React front end. It has a Node Express backend. That is the server as well as the a resource API. The authorization server in this case is FusionAuth. It's running in Docker, but this could be anything. So if you are using a different provider, as long as that provider gives you libraries and capabilities to access its APIs, then you could replace FusionAuth with provider of your choice. You do want it to be standards based, though, because this is all built kind of on OAuth and IDC standards.
And you
So
said the
as-
repo was auth
It's-
architecture on your GitHub?
Yes. So
Okay.
Maida Auth architecture.
All right, we'll drop that in the chat. Maybe people can have that as a resource if they need it. Put it up on the screen.
So the architecture that's running behind the scenes here, if we have a backend, here's all of the code for the backend here, and then we have our front end, and we have the code for the front end here, right? And then there's also a third party or something that's supposed to represent a third party API, which is essentially, I'll just show you. So I can log in. Once I'm logged in, there's more things that I can do, right? So this protected page is essentially representing a page that is the data that is providing the content for essentially this content here is on the same domain as the app is running on, and it basically just gives you back this line that says I'm protected because it is a secured route that you can't access unless you're logged in. The profile info is retrieved from the Auth API in the backend, and then this last one is an external API. So this is essentially simulating making a call to an API that is not running on the same domain as your application. So, you have backend for front end. I talked a little bit about the cookie situation, but if you are using BFF in kind of the API gateway manner, then you proxy the calls to the APIs. So in the backend, I can attach like the authorization bearer header with the access token and send that to the external API, and then I can send back the response from the API up to the front end, but that actual call that's being made to the external API is happening in the back end, because all of the security stuff, the tokens and everything like that, live in the back end and they never even touch the browser at all. So this is actually funny. Probably doesn't have much to do with anything, but this is an API that basically takes some random ingredients and makes up some steps and makes you a custom recipe. The funny thing is, like, a lot of these actually sound relatively decent. Like I'm kind of curious if I were to try to make something with some of this stuff, if it would actually be edible, which it very well might be. But yeah, I think if I go back here, let's maybe break this down a little bit. So if we go to our backend, when I said there's some data that only authenticated users can access, this is essentially the local API. So for simplicity's sake, it's only got one endpoint. It just gives you back this message, right? Like we saw that here.
There's a question from Bjorn in the chat, Kim. I'm curious why people don't do that proxying by default. Performance maybe for some backends?
Yeah, there can be performance or latency issues. I mean, my opinion is this. It's okay. It's not just my opinion. It's like the secure thing would be to do this by default. Like, you should do this. If you have full control of your backend, there's not a great reason to not do this, because it is absolutely the most secure way to do it. So I highly recommend that you do this. But there's certain circumstances where you can't, because you don't control the backend, or there's some kind of architectural restriction, or it's a lot of work, right? Like, you have to proxy all of your API calls, and if you have like a scenario where for some reason that's going to be difficult, or overly complex, or it's going to introduce a ton of latency, then it becomes just sort of a harder sell. But really, you should always do this. And after we kind of look at this, I'll show you the token mediating one, which is kind of like the middle step in between these two things. So we have this API here, and then we essentially have a proxy API that is an auth API. It's an auth proxy. So this sits in between the authentication provider, which in this case is FusionAuth, but it could be anything, and your front end. So this is the layer that when you make a call to do anything that involves security, you're not actually directly calling your provider, you're calling your backend, and the backend calls the provider. So in this scenario, you're making all of your authorization requests in the backend, you're storing sessions in the backend, you are storing your tokens in the backend, and essentially you can just leave that all out of the front end, and like this profile information is a call to the auth proxy in the back end. And then you have all of your endpoints for all of the standard auth processes, like go up to the top, right? Like this first one is the front end is going to call the auth check session endpoint in your back end to see if the user's already logged in, to see if the user is not currently logged in, but they do have a refresh token that is not expired, then they can get automatically logged in. And if they're not logged in at all and they don't have a refresh token, then we can set up proof key for code exchange for authorization code flow to get that ready for when they do log in. So this check session runs whenever somebody like arrives at the app, and we want to see, it is what it's called. Like we want to check to see if they have a session. So then when they want to log in, right, they would, we'll just do it all at the same time. They would click the login button, and this, it creates this authorization request, right? We have all of this here, which is the information for the authorization request. It has like the Pixie code challenge, and it has our client ID, and it has where we want to go afterwards. And all of this is actually composed by the backend. So what all the front end is doing is calling this auth login endpoint, right? We can probably show that too. We have our auth context. So this is where we were calling the check session on our API. This is not thread 1. Oh, that's services, sorry. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where I put everything. Yeah. This is all okay. Okay. Let's putting that aside. I don't want to be digging for stuff and then just wasting people's time.
You're good.
If we go back to kind of what's conceptually happening, right? People are kind of used to, in front end apps, the front end would make this authorization request itself. But in this case, the front end is just calling this auth login, and the auth login is actually the auth login endpoint in the backend is actually the thing that's creating this URL, right? This authorization request that is going to our authorization servers, OAuth to authorize endpoint, right? So this is calling out to FusionAuth, and it's going to make this request for authorization. If I log in, then so this happened very quickly, but what is happening here is we go to that login page, I enter my credentials, and then I'm logging in with the authorization server, and then the authorization server's callback URI is, see, we have this redirect URI here, and it's going to this backend route, right, which is this. And then this in the backend is going to do some additional processing with the auth. It's going to make sure it got back the right stuff. It's going to make sure everything sort of went the way it should with the request for authorization. And because we're using proof key for code exchange, it then does some additional stuff. So we had initially requested an authorization code, right? So it is going to exchange the code for an access token using proof key for code exchange. And that exchange is all coming out of the backend. It completes this song and dance with the authorization server, because what it's done is the backend has now received the code, the auth code, from the authorization server. And then it's going to take the code, it's going to take its client secret, it's going to take the PXE information, so the code verifier, and then it sends that using this call to FusionAuth. And then FusionAuth is going to check, okay, was the PXE challenge, did everything work out correctly with the PXE challenge? And if everything is good there, then it's going to send back tokens, right? So the tokens that we're getting back are the access token and then the refresh token. And there's, a bunch of error handling. And then it goes and the backend uses that access token to get the user info from the authorization server. So it makes another call to the authorization server and it gets back the user info. It puts this on a user response object. And then it is going to redirect the front end to the front end login callback. So if we sort of make sure. See, now what did I do here? For some reason, I can't find the things I'm trying to find.
Live demos, you gotta love it.
Yeah, magically has.
I have to step away for 1 second.
Oh, sure. So I think the reason why I can't find it all in one place is because it's not all in one place. Like, these things are happening independently because auth isn't being handled in the front end. It's just making calls. So the calls are being made in the areas of the app where they actually need to be made. And that's what. So the reason why I'm getting all confused is because I've built like 4 demos of this in multiple languages, and they all kind of start melting together in my brain at some point. But so the check session, right, is the call that's being made when the app loads. And then when you want to log in, then we have this call that is being made when you click on the login button, right? So then this is going to make the call to the backend auth login endpoint, and that's all the front end does, right? So it's not all consolidated in this auth context. Like, I could put this in the auth context, that would be totally fine. It's like one line, so I left it there so that people could have that level of abstraction just kind of out of the way so that they can see exactly what's happening in the place that it's happening, which, of course, as you can see, I just confused myself by doing that. But let's go back to... Okay, so what happened then is we have all of this stuff happening in the backend. We've now exchanged the code for the tokens by using PXE, and then we're going to redirect back to the front end URL. And we're not redirecting back in this case to a front end login callback route because we have check session running when the app loads, so we can just go to the homepage. And then check session is going to run from the homepage automatically because we navigated away and we're coming back. So the app is going to load again fresh because the redirection to the authorization endpoint happened. And, as it's a front end app, it's a browser based app, so we lost all of any kind of context that we would have maybe stored in the front end if we were doing auth in the front end. So when we come back, it's going to run the check session. It's going to find that the user is logged in now, and then it's going to update. It's going to load the proper UI to show you, that you now have access to all of these things. So then if we want to call an external API, right, we are making this single call to this one endpoint, because I tried to make the external API super simple also. The API actually has more capabilities than what's shown here, but all we're doing here is we're going to try and get a random recipe. So we are going to, from the front end, call this recipe endpoint. Let's go to the front end. We have our resource API page. And here it's just making the request to the resource API. And then it's doing this thing here, right? So it's including credentials. And what that does is include cookies. So if we go to cookies here, we have cookies for our app and this little bit. So this right here is the session cookie. And what this contains is the ID of the session that was created in the back end that is storing the user's actual info and tokens. In this, for the demos, I'm, storing this in like Express Cache, but, in real life, you would probably want to use Redis or something like that. So basically, what's happening kind of behind the scenes here is when you log in, it goes and it creates a session for you, and it takes those tokens and it puts them into the session on the back end, right? So here it's setting the session cookie. It's saying, we generated a session ID, and here's the information that it should contain. Then I guess I can come back to that one if people want to know more about it. But essentially, the thing to know is we have created this session cookie. And the session, when we created, it contains our tokens, and it contains it's identified by the session ID. So all the front end has in this cookie, which actually the cookie can't be read by JavaScript anyway. Even the session cookie can't be read by JavaScript. But the contents of the session cookie is just the session ID. It doesn't have any tokens or anything like that. So even if somebody got their hands on this cookie and for whatever reason was able to see what was in it, it's just a unique ID and it won't tell them anything. So then when we go and make an API call, since we're already in the external one, we'll just roll with that one. So when we go and make an API call, what we're doing is we're taking the session cookie and we're including with credentials, right? So we're attaching the cookie to the call that we were making. Okay, where is it? Here we go. We're attaching the cookie in the call that we're making, and this is going to our backend, right? It's not actually hitting the external API because we can't use cookies cross-domain, and this API, it's an external API, so I have kind of designed it so that it doesn't accept cookies anyway. It's looking for a bearer token in the authorization header. That's not what we have in the front end, so we take this cookie for the session ID, we send it to the backend. The backend then can go and look up the user's session, and once it finds the session, it's going to grab the access token out of the session. It's going to attach the access token to the request to the external API, and it's going to do that by doing what the resource API expects, which is to make that communication happen with the authorization header containing the access token as a bearer token. Let's find this. Okay, so it does this using the middleware, which, if I can remember where I put everything, would be great. This is it's in sessions. Okay. So here's the middleware factory, right? And this is where it is going to get past the error checking and everything. Actually, let's just... if I search, it's going to search the entire thing. I wish the click on things and take me there was working a little bit better than it is. Here's a session being created, by the way. Okay, Chris, refocus me. Help me here. Help me out here.
Focus, Kim. Focus.
Well, given what I've said so far, what's the next logical thing to show? Because we've included the credentials to send the cookie to the back end. The back end then makes the call to the resource server, which is an external call. And I've outclevered myself by using layers of abstraction. And now it's probably somewhere that I just can't find it. Actually, I wonder if we do this. Let's see, these are in other ones. Let's see. Is this in... This is the TMB one, but actually the TMB one works the same. So here's the BFF one. If it would go there, that'd be... This is... All right. Well, it's here. Yeah, it's here. Wait, did I already have that open? Okay, anyway. So here's where it's actually calling... Nope, that's the user info one. Oh my gosh. I know exactly what it's doing. It's just like okay. Here it actually is, like, for real in the back end. This is the right file. This is in the back end. Yes. Okay. So here's where it's actually making the call to the actual resource API, right? This is the external call. And it's adding the header for the authorization header with the access token as authorization. And the access token never touched the front end at all. Like, front end has no idea what the access token is. And that's great, right? And the same thing happens for refresh tokens in that sessions are being persisted here, but the front end doesn't have any knowledge at all of the refresh tokens either, because again, that's all happening in the back end. This is the best way to do this. There's just so much code in this repo. Actually, we're gonna end up with way too much code here too. But this is VBOC, so I should have made myself like a cheat sheet.
I did that once for a demo. I spoke at Michigan.net a couple weeks ago, and I couldn't remember the commands I was running, so I brought my other monitor and put them on the screen and just used that as a cheat sheet.
Yeah, it's such a good idea. There's just, I was trying to be all clever and make it easier for users by putting all of these demos in the same repo, and now when I'm trying to look for things, it just gives me everything in every single one.
Yep. Gotta love it.
I mean, I can probably tell it to... I just don't want to take up too much time. But another thing I think I want to show here is that I actually have all of this documented step by step on how this works, like everything it's doing. So we have this section, how it works, and it tells you exactly every step in an extremely prescriptive way what is happening, what endpoints are being called, where it's happening. Is it happening in the front end? Is it happening in the back end? Is it going to the proxy API? Is it coming back from the back end and then going to the front end? When does it clear cookies? When does it set sessions? All of this is documented in this super detailed fashion for all of these demos. So I'm just going to talk kind of conceptually about what's happening with the refresh tokens, because as you see, I'm struggling to actually find where everything actually lives in the code. But you can go to the repo and you can follow the whole flow there, kind of without the pressure of needing to contain everything I'm talking about to like an hour. So when we're using refresh tokens in order to keep sessions alive, basically, right? So if I was to refresh this, right? It happened very quickly, but what's happening in the front end when you do a refresh is it loses everything that you have in the front end, right? Anything that's in app memory is gone. But when I click refresh, I'm still logged in. I can still access everything. And that's because all of this logic is happening in the back end. Right. So what it's doing is when it gets the access token and the refresh token, it's setting them both in the user session, and then it is setting up a proactive refresh grant, essentially. So the session itself should only live as long as the refresh token lives, right? Because that makes sense. If your refresh token is expired, then you can't refresh your session. There isn't a way to do that. So it is taking the access token and the refresh token, is putting them in the session in the back end, and then it is essentially setting a timer for when the refresh token expires. It's setting that time to live on the cache, right? So the timer thing is happening elsewhere. Sorry. So it's scheduling a proactive refresh. So let's see if I can. This is just the clearing the timer. Here we go. So we're setting a timer in the back end to refresh the access token right before it expires. We're giving it a little bit of movement for latency, right? But the access tokens currently are set to expire in an hour. I believe this is what I put it at. They shouldn't live longer than an hour, really. There's no reason to have them live longer than an hour. In some cases, if you have extremely sensitive data, you probably actually only want them to live for about 10 minutes. But what it's doing is right before that hour is up, it is going to do a refresh grant using the refresh token. So it's going to send the refresh token as well as our client ID and client secret, which are basically like the username and password of the application itself, of the client for the authorization server. It's going to send that refresh token. The authorization server is going to perform a refresh grant, and it's going to send down new tokens. So that is all happening in the back end. And if I stayed here for longer than an hour, my session wouldn't expire because that's happening in the back end. In order to test this, that was fun because I had to set things at like 10 seconds in order to make sure that everything was happening. But yeah, so it's going to keep your session alive using refresh grant, and refresh tokens are extremely powerful, right? They're extremely powerful because they can renew a session, and sometimes they live for weeks. There are refresh tokens out there that live for like a month.
Wow.
And if you have one, and if you can get the information that the authorization server expects to be included with one in a refresh grant, then you can do many things with this refresh token, and they should never ever within the browser. So we had only recently even given people the option to have refresh tokens in the browser, basically with some caveats, right? So it kind of leads into a different architecture, which if we're going to switch architectures, I want to be deliberate about it. But this refresh token is mainly the reason that the auth providers are often doing token mediating backend so that they can handle the refresh token and they don't send the refresh token to the front end client at any point, in order to basically keep it secret, keep it safe.
Keep it secret, keep it safe. I love that.
Keep it safe.
That is a line actually from a favorite movie of mine.
Those movies are fantastic.
I'm glad you picked up on what I was putting down.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't? I don't want to like completely change subjects here, but I was gonna say, like, who doesn't like Lord of the Rings? I don't know. I don't know anybody who doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But if you don't, I would love to know why you don't, because I would love to meet
different strokes for different folks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, like what people have to not like about it. But yeah, so I'm gonna pause there because there are like 4 of these.
No, you're good because we're coming up on time anyway. So that was an amazing demo. There's a lot there to unpack. I'm gonna put the link to your GitHub back up on the screen. It's github.com/kmaida/auth-architecture to check that out. That was really cool. If anybody wanted to get started with Auth, and let's say they're kind of new to it, what would you suggest are some good resources, Kim?
My whole job basically is around creating resources for that exact scenario. So there are, for me personally, like my mind always goes to the specs, but I would not recommend that anybody go to the specs. I would go to, the auth provider that you're using. If you are using one, I would go to the auth provider that you're using and basically look at all of their getting started documentation. Oftentimes you'll get a quick start that, has simplistic steps, but then they'll have links to read more, to learn more about how certain things work. Auth is so incredibly deep that I actually don't recommend that people try to learn everything about it. You don't need to learn everything about it unless you want to essentially like go into it as a career. If you are just trying to get Auth working and be confident that it's working and that it's secure, then I would use a provider. And I work at FusionAuth, but there are a lot of awesome providers these days, and you can essentially use any of them. But I think like your provider's documentation is a great place. I mean, everybody uses AI these days. You can go ask Claude, take the OAuth 2 spec for, its application with front-end applications or something and summarize it for me, including, updates from RFCs. And it might be able to do that. I actually haven't put that exact prompt in before, so I'd actually be curious how good of a job it does. But Google is your friend. Also, there's a lot of great resources on YouTube these days too, where human beings explain it. I have several recordings of my talks where I go into this stuff, and it is one of those things that So it's always a struggle, right? Because we have this this curse of knowledge thing. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing just because I think it'll allow me to bring the window over so that I can look at you and look at the camera and not be looking off to the side. But when you are starting out, use a provider and be confident that the provider is doing what it needs to do. I actually did like a ton of analysis on this specific like architecture these architecture scenarios with a bunch of different providers because I wanted to know which architectures they're using by default in their SDKs. It doesn't mean that the user has to know that, but I do think that having knowledge of what these architectures are let you look at the SDK and recognize what the provider is doing.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that, while it's not knowledge that everybody in the world needs to know, if you are in charge of the authentication implementation part of an application, then it's helpful to know, at least at a high level, what's going on in sort of what can be a black box, right?
That's awesome.
But I have a bunch of resources that I think we can probably link in show notes and that type of thing. For learning some of these concepts.
Definitely.
But also I'm going to be doing a talk about all three of these architectures. It's very visual. There's lots of moving diagrams and things like that because I love learning visually and teaching visually. So I'm going to be giving that talk at JSConf in October, and then I will be talking about it in an slightly more Angular specific way at NGConf. Also in October. And I will probably do, some additional content as well. Right now, most of what I have is these demos was the first thing that I built, and then I created the presentation kind of based on the demos. Right now, I'm working on finding time to write blog posts, actually, on like a series on all of these architectures. So if you want to know more about these specific things and you aren't able to attend one of the conferences where I'll be talking about it, then those blog posts should, I'm hoping, cover pretty much all of the content that's going to be in the presentations, and there'll be videos too. Although I think that JSConf is live streaming like for free. I think you can, if I'm remembering correctly.
Is it JSConf in Maryland?
Yes.
See, attend, get your discounted ticket free.
Yeah, I think there's a way to actually watch remotely and have it not cost money.
I'm not sure. Let's see, registered now, early bird, standard, late.
If it's not like obviously on the site, it may be that the speakers just got links to share for people to do that. So I do actually have a link. I would have to dig it up, but I believe I posted it on LinkedIn actually. So
cool.
If you look for the yellow JSConf thing, there should be a link in there to be able to watch the live stream.
Cool. Awesome. Make sure you follow Kim down on LinkedIn right there. Kim, it's been great. This is amazing. I'm going to have to go through that demo and play with it and see what's what. Thank you so much for the time. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah.
No, thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I know that I talked a lot on just one thing. So it is really an indication of how deep this stuff can get too, I think. For sure. But yeah, if anybody has any questions for me at all, like, please let me know. I love helping people out with this stuff. I love teaching people. I try to do it in an approachable way. One of the reasons I don't often do demos like in talks is because they're not very visual. And like putting up a wall of code is kind of just not my style of teaching, as you probably could tell from the demo just went.
You did fine.
But if I can convey concepts visually, like in a presentation, I think it's just much more easy to consume when I happen to be the teacher, because that's my love language.
For sure. Cool. So. Well, no, thank you again. I appreciate it. Anybody that's tuning in, thank you for tuning in, checking out the stream. It's going to be posted to all of the socials. It'll be available on our YouTube channel. Just a reminder, I am flying out to Commit Your Code next week, and that's going to be on Wednesday that I'm flying. So I will not be doing a stream, but stay tuned to my Twitter account, LinkedIn, the TuxCare Twitter and LinkedIn for any updates on the next stream that's going to be happening. And with that, Kim, have a great day.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. You too.
Later, skaters.
Bye-bye.